All right, friends, I hate to interrupt your fun you're having, but welcome. And some of you were not at church yesterday. Some of you don't go to our church, and it's fine. And we're glad that you are here for our program tonight, which I'm excited about. It's a piece of a lot of things that we're trying to do around thinking about, politics, race, changing the world, all kinds of things. And so my guest tonight is, this has been cool to have a guest like this, because ever since this was announced, people are like, you get to talk to Molly Barker. Like, it's great. And so I want to present to you Molly Barker. Let's welcome her. And Molly, instead of introducing you, I thought I'd just ask you a couple questions about yourself, and then we'll move to the topic of the night. So we'll start at the beginning. Where were you born?
I need to say that I'm skited. Have you all ever heard that expression? It's like the combination between scared and excited. Isn't that funny? Okay, I was born here in Charlotte, North Carolina.
The rare Charlotte native. How many Charlotte natives? Raise your hand.
Yay.
There are always a few. Okay. And I have to say, I remember very clearly the first time I saw Molly. You won't know this story. I lived in Davidson, and I was walking down the street with a friend of mine, and suddenly I thought a gazelle had leaped out of the woods and sprinted down the street. And I said, "What was that?" My friend said, "That's Molly." And I watched, had this just perfect gait running. I was impressed. And that running thing became pretty interesting, though, right? Because you eventually started an organization. Talk about that, Girls on the Run.
Yeah, so it's wild. This is the 20th anniversary on Friday of the start of Girls on the Run, which I started at Charlotte Country Day School with 13 fabulous little human beings. And last year, the program served its millionth girl. And I would never have imagined that at all. So running really, let's see. I would say that running kind of saved me from myself. But I started running when I was about 14 or 15. And for me, running still is and was then this sort of place of empowerment for me. It was where all of the noise that says, to myself at that time, you're not pretty enough or smart enough or whatever enough, all of those voices would just slip away when I ran. And I felt whole, full, empowered. And I think that's why I started Girls on the Run, was to give girls the same space and acknowledgement of their own power. And it just happens to be running.
So for anybody who doesn't know what Girls on the Run is, tell just briefly, what is that? What happens?
So it's a 10-week after-school program where 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders, and we have a program for middle schoolers now, come together twice a week, and they're training for a 5K. We tell the girls you can skip, hop, jump, cartwheel, or roll. The whole point is just to go forward, define running for yourself. And there's a curriculum that I wrote that has since been tweaked as the landscape for girls has changed, because things are very different than they were 20 years ago, and yet they're still the same. They're different and the same. And the kids do this program with fabulous volunteer coaches, and at the end they participate in a 5K, which is sort of this huge celebration. Every girl gets the number 1, and they finish it, and they've learned a lot about how to stay true to the essence of themselves, and that's the whole point of the thing.
That's hard for people to do.
Just to stay true to your essence?
Yeah.
I would say it's
really hard.
It's a miracle, actually.
Yeah. Why is it so hard, do you think?
This is where if I were doing my red boot thing, I'd go, why do you think? So within church language, one of the things that we say is that on the one hand, right, we're made in the image of God. There's this beautiful, noble self. But God made us because God wanted us to love, not just be marionettes. So God created us with some space that it doesn't have to go that way. It can go another way.
And so sometimes we don't love. Sometimes there comes to be this darkness. You see it, we're going to talk about this more in this election season. You know, all the ads, all the talk, it feeds that dark side. If you feed the dark side grows. And sometimes it feels like the dark side is anger at somebody else. I'm so angry at Hillary. I'm so angry at Trump or whatever. You name it. We're angry at somebody. But really the one being consumed is yourself, right? And that dark side. And we can call that sin, we can call it fallenness, we can call it brokenness, and you just kind of forget who you are. And then just out in the world, you're defined by, I guess it's your company that defines you by how much you're producing, and the world defines people by how they look. Lisa and I somehow were surfing channels last night and came across the Miss America pageant, and it was just fascinating to watch in various ways. So, yes, there's all these messages that say you're never good enough, no matter how much you've produced. I have the privilege of talking closely with people who are phenomenally successful. But when you get to know them really well, they've kind of got this, like, it's not enough. Kind of interesting, isn't it? There's just something that plagues us inside. So when you started Girls on the Run, I mean, you weren't thinking, I'm going to serve 1 million girls. You were hoping for 12.
I was just hoping, what was I hoping for? I don't know exactly what I was hoping for. I think at the time, I needed the program, right? So, but I couldn't have articulated that. And so I started it to serve and empower other girls, and then I end up getting as much, if not more, from the program. So it's sort of, you know, an and. But my hope was, when I started it, I had a picture of the girl that I wanted to serve. And she was the shy girl, the one that was sort of introverted, maybe a little bit lost. And by the end, I had images of her standing very tall and walking confidently into a room. But what's interesting is, as I've spent more time with girls, it's less about how she shows up. It's about showing up as she is. So a lot of people will say, well, my girl's so much more confident and she talks more, and all of this because of Girls on the Run. And I'm like, well, that's great. And if she's shy, maybe she's shy more. You know, like just whoever she is, just be that. You know, there's nowhere to be other than that. And so it's taking whatever a girl identifies as her greatest self and then just being that more, defining it for herself.
So I've never heard you talk about that, so that's really fascinating, because to me that fits with our topic for the night. I'm interested in, I'm interested in a lot of things, but right now I kind of look out during this political season and I just see so many people that I know well making themselves miserable. And others make them miserable, and everybody's just miserable, and everybody's angry, and everybody's upset, and none of us are really being our true self. There's a standing up tall, but it's like, I'm going to stand up tall and I'm going to knock your block off, which isn't a genuine kind of standing up tall, right? So what Molly is kind of, she does something I've tried to do for years, but she does it really well in an exemplary way, and that's just talk to people that she doesn't know. And the way we built this program was to say, how do you have a conversation with somebody that you don't know or that you don't understand? And the understand, that part's interesting, because see, there's several things that go on in our country. The political climate, clearly, people aren't talking to and listening to people who think differently, right? You kind of have the thing where, you think your neighbor's like a pretty good person, and then one day, he puts a Trump sign up or she puts a Hillary sign up, and you think, how do they survive in the world? They're being so stupid. I mean, I thought we were friends. Yeah, it's just this thing happens, right? And we've not listened to each other. We've not shared with each other. There's something to that, right? Is to be able to listen to someone, you also need to be able to be vulnerable and to share. You're kind of doing some of that already. You're not saying, I was a brilliant person, I started Girls on the Run because I had some brilliance, I was going to drop down on those who needed it. You're kind of saying you were at a broken place yourself. I mean, isn't that part of listening?
Yes, and I think I hate when people ever reference me as an expert. I'm actually an expert on nothing. I've been called a parenting expert, and if you had found me several years ago dealing with a 16-year-old who was spiraling out of control, I would have been terrified for you to discover what I was dealing with at home. right? So
Children exist to humble you.
yes,
Clearly.
So it's, but back to your comment about the signs in the front yard. I am going to be blatantly open. I don't know any other way. I lean left politically. I lean left.
That's why she's sitting over there.
Yeah. So I have learned that I have so many biases of my own. So I will size up a person the moment they walk in the room based on my own experiences, what I see, what I read. And the thing that sort of took me off rails was I was in an airport. This was some time ago, and I've almost stopped reading social media lately. It's too toxic. It just seems I can't deal with that. But I had just finished reading an article that was talking about something related to Trump, and I was going down the walkway in my airplane, and there was a white male, and I'm going to go right ahead. I'm just going to box that man in. He was a white male. He had a Trump 2000 Make America Great Trump shirt on. I'm walking down the aisle, and by the time I'd gotten to my seat, I had painted an entire portrait of this man. He was poor. He was uneducated. I could go through the list. He was racist. Now, I had never talked to this gentleman. And so we flew into our flight, and then we got to our destination, and I'm going to the baggage. I'm going to cry. I'm going to the baggage claim area, and this same gentleman is on his knees next to his 13 or 14-year-old daughter who has Down syndrome, and she can hardly speak. And he has a water bottle and is like fueling her with water and handing her snacks. I don't know what to say about that. That's it. Like, what am I going to do with that information? And so I just made a decision, as I do with a lot of these conversations, to look I've just chosen to look to the human underneath. And if I had the opportunity to have a conversation with him, I might have started it there. But I've noticed that as of late, I have to examine my own biases. It doesn't mean that I disagree with his political choices at all. It just means, am I going to diminish him as a human being because of our differences, or am I going to just disagree? And that's what has been sort of a interesting thing to go through.
So we have all this stuff going on in our country that, like I said, I see people make themselves miserable. And I think, therefore, we elect people that then make us miserable. And it's just this vicious circle, right, that we're in. We don't know how to get out of being miserable. People tend to say, well, what's the solution? I've been blogging on this, how to be a Christian during this political climate. And a big piece of it, I think, is, in so much of what we deal with, is that we just never talk to each other. We just never talk to each other on any of a variety of issues. Race is a pretty interesting issue. White people generally talk to white people. Myers Park white people generally talk to Myers Park white people. And we don't know who else to talk to. We don't know how to talk to someone else. We don't know how to find them. So race continues to be a problem because we don't really understand each other. You hear something about, well, how do African Americans feel about the white police? And we tend to think, well, we think something, but we don't really know because we've never actually spoken with someone or listened to someone. And occasionally you hear a story of someone who's actually talked to someone, and it blows your mind, right? So I've talked about the police situation with African Americans. I've told some of these people this story before. I have a friend in town who's an African American pastor. And he drives a Mercedes, and he had gone to work out at lunch at the Y, and so he's in his, sweatsuit, and he's driving back to the church, and a policeman pulls him over, and he rolls down the window, and the policeman says, "Hey, buddy, where'd you get that car?" And this doesn't happen to me. Of course, I only drive a Honda Civic. But so again, when you know someone, you're gonna then what does that feel like for you? We're not good at listening. We in the church are horrible at listening because in the church we've always thought we're the ones with the answers, and we're kind of dogmatic. We tell other people what they should think. And the reason nobody listens to what we think they should think is that we haven't listened to anybody. And we're horrible at it. So we need to listen on the area of race. Homosexuality is a huge divider within our culture, and it is within the church. And I've been in the middle of what may be a division in the United Methodist Church on the issue of homosexuality. And what puzzles me over and over and over again is I'll talk to somebody who, let's say a conservative, and I'll say, have you ever talked to a gay Christian who wants to be married? And they're like, well, no. But then I'll talk to a gay Christian and say, have you ever actually talked to a conservative Christian who thinks your lifestyle is a bad idea? Well, no. They'll seem evil to each other, right? So we never actually can talk to each other on these things. And this has been a long road for me. I can be frankly and personal too. When I was a young man, I've told a few of you this before. When I was a young man, I wasn't like a great athlete, and I wasn't super handsome or anything. The one thing I had going for me was I had a pretty good brain. And I was a hard worker, so I thought, I will work hard, and I will know more than anyone else, and I will be right on everything. So by the time I was 27, I was right on everything. And I was happy to tell you what was right. And if you were wrong, I was happy to tell you how you were wrong. And I was a very unpleasant person. I don't know why Lisa married me, but she did somehow. And I've learned since then that being right is just not all that interesting, right? But being humble, it's a pretty cool place to be. A lot of the pressure's off, and you learn so many amazing things just when you talk to other people. Why do you think it's hard for us to talk to each other?
My experience has been that, I'll speak for myself, it's hard for me to speak with others when I'm somehow afraid I'm going to be judged, or somehow maybe they're right. Maybe they're right. Maybe I am broken, and maybe I am not okay, and maybe I won't go to heaven. And so, you know what I'm saying? So instead of going into the conversation, I just put up a wall because maybe they're right. Maybe I don't actually matter. And so, again, I keep coming back to my own biases, like my own biases about myself, about mattering, about all of that stuff. And what I'm discovering is so much of what reason people aren't talking has so much more to do with me than it does the other person, because I can be the one to go first. I can. I'm reminded of this weird thing that I did about a year ago. I have lived in Myers Park for most of my life. And if you had looked at my sphere of influence, my circle of friends a year and a half ago, there were very few black people in it. There were also very few Muslim people. I had plenty of lesbian, gay, transgender folks, but none of these racial and religious differences. They weren't there. So I did what any sort of do-gooding, principled Myers Park woman would do. I made a decision that I was just going to start being nice to everybody and just see what would happen. So my garbage collector is African American. He was, doing the garbage thing, and I decided to strike up a conversation with him. So Antonio has become one of my dear friends, but it was very sterile at first. It was kind of like, ooh, how do I do this? I don't know any black people, and ooh, I want to talk to black people, and you're the black person in my front yard, and ooh, I think I'll have a conversation with you. It was very awkward, and fortunately, Antonio was very open.
Patient.
He was very patient with me. So we met at a Wendy's for breakfast one morning, and I'll never forget, we were talking back and forth, and we sat down at the table, and I said, so what's your first impression of me? And he said, you're kind of like a hippie.
You got off light.
I did.
Yeah.
And then he said, what's your impression of me? And I said, you seem like a pretty laid back, open kind of guy, which he is. And we started talking, and he grew up in Charlotte, and he, blah, blah, blah. But one of the things that struck me about it, when I shared with him that I had struggled with alcoholism, and that I'd grown up in Myers Park, and I'm very out about that, so I've been sober 20-something years. But I had shared that with him. He was dumbfounded by that. You? You struggled with addiction? You had nothing to worry about. What were you so stressed out about? That was kind of an eye-opener. This is a man, who had gotten in a little bit of trouble, didn't have many resources, had been married more time. For his whole life, I've been married twice. It was just an eye-opening conversation. He doesn't struggle with addiction. He's worked hard his whole life. I walked away like, I'm a mess. So it was mutual. It was a mutual, I walked in kind of thinking, oh, I'm going to, be this cool kind of whatever. And I walked away going, oh my God, I am a mess and a wonderful mess.
It's okay to be a mess.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes I think the fear of talking to each other is like, we're not sure we can or how, or the fear of being wrong is that my very well-formed ideas are really only half-baked, right? Or I thought I understood this issue thoroughly, and then, I didn't understand it. And then the other thing I find is just self-interest kind of consumes my viewpoint. So it seems to me there ought to be some principle that we could all work on, which is if I start to feel really hot on anything, it doesn't matter. Find the person who is most likely to help me see what I'm not seeing. Okay, so I'll give you an example. The thing came up a few months ago about Black Lives Matter. And that means a lot of things to different people. But there was a big recoil in the white community saying, all lives matter, right? And that makes sense. Of course, all lives matter. But go talk to African Americans about that. Say, okay, I heard Black Lives Matter, but I want to say all lives matter. I won't even tell you what they'll say. They'll all tell you the exact same thing because they have a good answer for this, right? And after that, after you hear them, you can continue to say all lives matter, but you got to think about it a little bit differently. And you understand what it means that, well, Black lives matter, and maybe it's actually important to say that. And maybe for us white people to be the ones who say it most resoundingly. How do you talk to somebody you don't know and don't understand? Like, you just go find somebody, tap them on the shoulder. What do you do? You've done this. You've met some total strangers.
So in 2014, I rented a Mustang convertible. I was going through a midlife crisis, people. I rented a Mustang convertible, and I drove from Charlotte to Las Vegas, and I interviewed hundreds of Americans about what was going on with this us and them. And I think part of what made that successful was being charming Southern. You have this little twinkle in your eye, you can kind of give a little nod and whatever, and I'm white. And I'm middle-aged, so I'm kind of past the like, oh, she's coming on to me thing. And I'm small, okay? So all those things allowed me to have conversations with hundreds of people. I did not frighten them. I'm kind of like just totally this. And so it's the sort of beauty of small talk. It's that first encounter. It's like having, not having technology. It was like there was a guy named Dave that was in line in a Starbucks, and he had Dave on his shirt. That's perfect, people. Just, hey, Dave. And he looked at me like, how do you know that? I said, it's on your shirt, man. And we started talking about the Energizer drinks that were new in the Starbucks container. And then within a few minutes, I said, I'm working on this project that's looking at the hyperpolarized state of American politics. You want to talk? And he was like, hell yes. And we went outside, and we sat on the porch, and this gentleman, he just poured his heart out. He could talk about amendments 1, 2, 6, and there was some other one. He knew more about the Constitution than I did. And he kept talking, and I just kept listening, and he was getting more, kind of animated about people that need to work, and those people don't work, and on and on. And then I said, so tell me about your children. Do you have kids? And he began to tell me about his children. And then he got very quiet. And I just sat there. And then he said, my son. And he told me a story about his son who almost died in a car accident involved alcohol. And I just sat there.
And
That's it.
And you don't have to go to Las Vegas, though.
No. And you don't have to talk politics either. Like, you know, the outcome of that. Yeah.
But people love. So I have weird things when I go out in the world. I'm on a plane, wherever I am, and somebody doesn't know me. I'm always happy to strike up a conversation. I hate it when it gets to the point though, and they say, "Now, what do you do?" And I always try to evade it. But if I have to, I'll say I'm a minister, and that always changes the conversation.
Oh yeah.
But when that doesn't happen, I just find perfect strangers will just pour out their hearts to you. Tell me about your kids. They'll be sobbing, telling you, my son hasn't spoken to me in 2 years. They don't even know you. And what that says to me is that people are desperately lonely. And they really need to share what's in their heart. And if you appear to be somebody who cares and will listen, they'll let you have it. And you said it doesn't have to be politics. I always grew up learning, don't talk about politics and religion. That's what we really ought to talk about, right? Like today, you need to ask people, why you love Donald Trump? Why? Tell me about that. And it turns out they're not whatever your stereotype was. And people who loathe Hillary, ask somebody who supports Hillary, what is that about? And you just learn so much and you become civil, and it's the only way the country is going to be different, right? We have gridlock in Washington. You know why we have gridlock in Washington? Because we have gridlock in Charlotte. We have gridlock in our neighborhoods. We're just not good at talking to each other. Who are the most, tell me an interesting, you told us a couple. Somebody really interesting you've had a conversation with.
This past week, I have moved to a new neighborhood, and I was out on a run, and I was lost. I'm always lost. I was on this run lost, and I was very tired, and I was coming up a hill, and I passed a truck that had a large Confederate flag on the window. And I just kept running, but then the guy that owned the truck started walking to the car with his landscaping materials. And so I thought, well, I've always wanted to talk to somebody that has that on their truck. So I went over there and I said, hey, tell me what this flag means to you. And he just looked at me and goes, you go first. What does it mean to you? And I said, well, it's a symbol of racism to me, I mean, I have to say that when I lived in Charlotte my whole life, I dated a guy that had one on his Camaro, this was back in the 70s, and I just have an issue with it. It resembles, something racial to me. And I said, what does it mean to you? And he says, it's about Southern heritage. And he went on to explain to him what that meant, and men working for their money and taking care of their families. And then there was a little bit of a pause, and I'm just listening. And then he said, and these were his exact words, they sold their own into slavery. And I just listened. And then he said it was about the war of northern aggression. Is that thing? That was it. And what's interesting is I said, thank you. I said, what's your name? He's told me. I told him mine. And I hope I see him again. What I'm noticing is I can't change his mind within a 2-minute conversation. That's not my goal, nor is it his goal to change mine. It's about building just the smallest bridge. If I can be the one person that doesn't shame or judge him because of his belief, there might be another one person like me that he never even thought existed. And so over time, that's all I'm trying to be, is be that one that listens, that can shatter the stereotype he has of people that are not like him. I'm not sure if that makes sense. But that's why listening is the first step. It's not going to change everything, but it is going to build a bridge. And if I were ever to see Brian again, maybe we'd have another conversation. Then maybe we'd go have coffee.
So in Christian theology, the Bible's full of this, right? The Bible's not full of the right people thumping the wrong people. The Bible's all about reconciliation. The Bible is about, the number one commandment in the Bible is not thou shalt think rightly. But the number one commandment of the Bible is don't be afraid, right? So most of the stuff goes wrong because we're fearful. It doesn't feel that way. It feels like we're angry, but there's fear that drives so much of this. So I think about who's the ultimate fearless person, and for Christians, that would be Jesus. And what's interesting about Jesus is he seems to be the master of coming to someone he does not know, and he doesn't start instructing them. He asks them questions, and he must be an extraordinary listener. That's fascinating to me, that Jesus begins with questions and with listening. Who else have you met?
On the first person I met on my trip was a housekeeper named Dory at the Holiday Inn in Williamsport, Pennsylvania. If you ever go there, she still works there. Say hi. I just finished a run. She had come into the pool area. She had this ginormous mop she was cleaning, and we made eye contact, and she had a small nose piercing right here, and at the time I was going through my really hippie stage, so I had one too. And we commented.
I'm not judging you. Really.
And we commented on our matching nose piercings. And then I said, hey, I'm just starting this trip. I'm asking people about the us and them that's going on in the world. Would you talk to me about that? And she was like, yes. And I want to note, she took her mop and she set it aside. She stopped what she was doing, and we were there together. And I said, what do you think that's about? And she goes, money. It's all about the money. And she just went on and talked about how she had worked for minimum wage for most of her life, and that she had 2 sons, and neither of them would ever want the life that she'd had. So one of them had started selling drugs. She didn't know where he was, but she understood. I mean, who wouldn't want to sell drugs? You make a lot more money. And then we stopped for a minute, and then she said, and these were the words that set the tone for the rest of the trip. She looked at me and she said, what everybody wants. Everybody is to be seen, to be heard, and to know they're loved.
Bingo.
And that was it. I was like, thank you. Because the rest of the trip, it was like liberating to know that I didn't have to change, fix, correct, or judge anyone if all I did was listen. That was all I had to do.
I don't know if you're noticing principles in what she's talking about. She's able to say, that flag to me is a symbol of racism and hatred, but she's saying it in a way, not, that's a symbol, you're not doing that, right? It's a gentle, open, and then you follow with what does it mean to you, right? So there's a humility. You also, those of us in the room, we labor under a certain disadvantage that I discovered. I told a few of you this on Christmas Eve a couple of years ago. There's a gap between services. And I decided I'm just going to go to downtown Charlotte and see what's happening in the middle of the city between services. So I went down, I was on the sidewalk, and the city bus stopped, and a woman got off. She looked exhausted. And she had a big suitcase, and she got it down. The rollers weren't working very well, and she's dragging it, and she walked right past me, and I said, Merry Christmas. And she said, won't be for me. I said, tell me. She said, you don't look like the kind of fellow who really cares. Mm-hmm. I said, what do you mean? She said, you're a white guy in a suit. I said, well, I'm all ears. And then she began to tell me her story, right? So you have this kind of disadvantage. You got the hippie advantage, like that helps you. Yeah. What I want to do, having observed that, is I have a special guest tonight, someone from Molly to meet and talk to, and for you guys just to watch that happen. So I want to ask my good friend Rose Hamid to come. Welcome, Rose.
Thanks, Rose.
I feel like I already know you.
There you are. All right. Rose has been a friend of mine for a very long time. Somebody said, I mentioned her the other day, and somebody said, she is Charlotte's most famous Muslim.
I thought Jabril was.
She's had a big year. She's been on CNN, lots of places, and Rose is to school in a lot of ways. And so you two have met. So Molly, just talk to Rose.
I mean, I've heard, God. So I know about you. So first of all, this is weird, people. This is weird, because if we were sitting in a Starbucks or something, we would not have this many people like watching, okay? And so I'm going to just do my best to be myself. And I know of you, I would think you would do the same thing, correct?
I'll try to be real.
Yeah. So will you tell people who you are? Because I don't know if everybody here knows. I mean,
everybody here might not have
seen.
Heard of me. My name is Rose Hamid, and I'm a Muslim who lives here in Charlotte. I had attended a Trump rally in January and was escorted out, and that kind of made the news. So that was me. One of the things that I do want to say that I took from that was, and everything you're saying is like, yes, that's exactly right, was that I realized that while I was at the Trump rally, the thing that I took away from that experience was the interactions I had with the people I was sitting around. Because I went in there and I was kind of nervous, looking, obviously Muslim. I had a shirt on that said, "Salam, I come in peace," literally and figuratively to disarm people and to make them think that I'm not that scary. And somebody actually said that to me. It's like, she doesn't look that scary. So she really did. She was like, you don't look scary. So, but people welcomed me. The fact was that these folks who were there, these, Trump supporters, were very welcoming of me. And that's the thing that I took away from that, which is what inspired me to go to Cleveland, because I wanted to have those kind of interactions, because like you said, the interactions with the people was the most meaningful thing. So in order to try to start up a conversation, I had these flower pens made. And this was the thing that allowed me to have the conversations with people. So I would walk up to people and say, "Have a nice day." And they would go, "What's this about?" And I'd say, "We're just trying to put a positive face on Islam and Muslims." 99% of the people, well, I would say everybody that I actually had a conversation with said, "Wow, that is so great. We're so glad you're here." And so that started conversations. There were some people who'd walk away and go, like, it's like, been there, done that. So there was those folks, and they just kind of like made a beeline away from us. But it was an incredible experience, because that's how we started conversation with people who are extremely different in that respect, in particular, politically.
It's funny, my red boots, the thing that I wore on the trip, they were the conversation starters. So people would come up, mostly women. Men didn't ever give commentary on my clothing. And no, they did not. But they'd go, "Ooh, I like your red boots." And I'd be like, "You like these? Hi, I'm doing this report on the hyperpolarized state of American politics. You want to go talk?" And they would. I don't know that I really have much question. I'd rather have like a conversation. So, what do I want to ask you?
The fact that I realize that we're not hardly different at all. I think
No,
we're
we're not.
so the same.
Yes.
So that to me is the biggest. I kept trying to find points where we were different. It's like, no, I agree with that. Agree with everything. So it's.
I guess I would be curious to know, like, what does it feel like to be you?
It is a blessing. It is a true blessing, because I feel like I'm me wherever I am. Mm-hmm. I try to be me wherever I am. And sometimes I have to realize that people don't know me, and I have to be more me. My me has to come out, and I have to, a lot of times I have to be the first one to start the conversation. Even when I go to a cashier or should I just talk to you?
No, I think we should talk to everybody, right? We're all here together. Yeah.
So when I go to a store somewhere, I could look at people kind of tense up a bit. The cashier kind of tenses up a bit because she's not really sure what to expect. And so when I smile and say, "Hey, how you doing?" you could physically see them relax. So that's where I feel like I have to be aware of the fact that people can be a little apprehensive or nervous about, what they think of me. So I have to be super friendly, which is not a bad thing. I think that one of the things about wearing hijab is that one of the lines is so that we can be seen and known as being Muslim. And that carries with it a certain responsibility. But isn't that good, to have to live up to a certain level of how God wants you to behave in public? So I can't be yelling at my kids at Walmart. So I have to check myself sometimes. And sometimes that is a reality, is that I can't be, I always on, in public. I know that I'm being watched, or people are looking at me, but God's always watching, so maybe that's a good thing.
It's funny, I'm thinking about being the founder of Girls on the Run and being sort of watched when I was with my children. They're older now, but like being in the Target or something and wanting to yell really loud at them, and then thinking, oh my God, that's not what the founder of Girls on the Run should be doing. Do you know what I mean? It's sort of like wearing that on me.
Yeah.
And so talk to me about the hijab. Am I saying hijab? Because I know that among my Muslim friends, there is a variation on what that represents. Some wear it, some don't.
Well, I know it's strange for some people. Might think it's odd for a woman to be here at a church wearing a white hijab in the middle of September. But I'll have you know, this is winter white. It is after Labor Day. So, fear not.
Oh, well, I am. Woo!
And the shoes match the top.
I am so relieved to know that is winter white.
That's what it's about. It's about the fashion thing. Actually, wearing hijab to me, and it's something that it is, as a Muslim, I grew up Catholic, so I became Muslim after I started my family. I didn't convert because of my husband. I left the church when I was just before confirmation, so at like 12, 13 years old. So it's not like somebody came up to me the other day and said, "Don't you miss it?" I'm like, sorry, but no. I left a long time ago. They thought I was forced to convert, but anyhow. So I rebelled against the concept of hijab for a long time because I felt like it was some man-made construct that I was just thinking, I'm not having it. But the more I learned about my faith, the more I realized that this is something that God has asked us to do. So to me, it's an act of worship to cover. It's my obedience to God. It's something that I can do that I hope will be pleasing to God. That's my purpose for wearing it. Another aspect of it is to say that my worth and my value to society doesn't come from my physical attributes, but by who I am as a person and how I treat people, how well I behave, and how I represent what God wants us to be. So that's what it means to me. It's a protection to me. I feel protected when I wear it. But I also don't. I know a lot of Muslim women who don't cover. The majority of Muslim women don't cover, FYI, and across the world. The majority of Muslim women don't cover. And sometimes women cover because it's part of their culture. And they're not doing it to please God, which is, once again, I'm not trying to judge anyone. I'm just telling you that that's the reality of women who cover. Is some people do it for social pressures. Some people do it because it's something that they feel they want to do to please God, and some people don't feel like it's something that needs to be done. So you'll find a spectrum of women who cover and why.
And it's interesting to hear you say that, because I think about the spectrum on the same for non-Muslim people, and as the mother to a daughter, trying to figure out, not in a religious sense, but how much should my 17-year-old be covering up? And how much should she be showing or not showing, So
when you look at the amount of fabric in a girl's pair of shorts,
yes,
and like this much fabric, and then you look at the boys' shorts, it's a lot of fabric. They're being very economical. Fabric.
Well, it reminds me, my daughter is 17. We were getting ready to go to Michael's, the craft store, and she had on a shirt and took the sweater off, and the whole back of her shirt was like V'd out, okay? All the wonderful glory of her lingerie and everything was on the back. And I was like, oh no, we're not going in with that. And she did the most amazing thing. She said, well, you said at Girls on the Run that you shouldn't judge people by how they look or what they wear. And I was
Kids
like,
are so manipulative.
mango. So, it's interesting.
Yeah.
So another question that I just comes to mind is rage. I can get enraged by what I read, what I see, but I am acknowledging that I can go back to the porch swing at my house and just be this. And I'd love to know, and I feel myself a little bit, that makes me emotional. What do you do? How do you have rage? Do you feel rage? What do you do with it?
I don't feel a lot of rage for the political climate right now. I'm just, it's more like, oh my God, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. It's more that than it is rage. Quite honestly, the place where I feel rage is, my father is Palestinian, as is my husband. And so when I see what's happening in Palestine and to the people in my husband's family and my family, the people who live there, that's where I find rage. Mm-hmm. But I just feel like I feel helpless in that rage. So and unfortunately, I'm far enough removed that it doesn't affect me every day. But I went there in June. Actually, my husband and my daughter are there right now in Palestine visiting my mother-in-law and my in-laws. And they survive in wherever they are. They're in the West Bank, which is not Gaza, and I can't even imagine what Gaza would be like. But I know that people are living in Gaza and they survive however they can. But that's where I find rage, but I can't. Yeah. I feel like I can't do enough, and it makes me feel inadequate in that regard. But it's not even a rage for me, it's a rage for over there, which is, so I really don't feel rage here. It's more like, I can't believe that it's happening again to whatever group of people.
The one thing I'm experiencing, having gotten involved in these conversations, is once I've seen, I can't unsee. And some of you may have read in the newspaper last year, I had a conversation with a Muslim fellow in the Minneapolis airport. And he was this lovely man who was in the middle of prayer, and I almost stepped on him. And I felt really bad about that, so I waited till he finished his prayer, and then I said, may I ask you a few questions about that? And he's from Somalia. He was very responsive, answered my questions, and it went viral, right? I wrote a little bit about it. We exchanged emails because I certainly wasn't going to share anything about our encounter without his permission. And it was my first view into what he lives with. And just the little tidbits through social media, some of the videos that he would post of literal, death, bombings happening because of where he lived and who he was. And that was my first sort of recognition of not just what's happening here, but in other...
And so he lived in Somalia.
Mm-hmm.
And okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, what's happening around the world is just, the word that keeps coming to mind is relentless. It's just, things are relentless on so many fronts. There's so many things that we're constantly bombarded with that are just not the way they're supposed to be. And if people followed their faith the way that they were supposed to, as opposed to following a particular person who's telling them what their faith is supposed to be, if they followed their faith, then the world would be a much better place. But unfortunately, like the woman who said that money is what runs the world, that power, greed, those are the things that tend to overpower what faith dictates.
So you were Catholic?
Yeah.
Okay. What's that about? Like, what happened?
Well, there's a pope
Yes, no.
at the Vatican.
What I'm trying to was it like a slow progress toward your switching or converting
Well,
or
my
how
mother
did
is
that-
from Barranquilla, Colombia.
Okay.
My father's Palestinian. He left Palestine and went to South America, met my mother, and came to the U.S. As a Palestinian, he grew up at a time in Palestine when Muslims, Christians, Jews all got along. Actually, the town right next to him is Christian. So what he saw as an example of how people lived their lives, everybody was the same. In Islam, it teaches that Muslims, Jews, and Christians are all people of the book, the same people who've received revelation from the same one God. So there's this sense of there's not that much difference from his perspective. But also, when he was growing up, it was Palestine was under British rule, so they were purposely trying to eradicate Islamic teaching. So he didn't get a lot of formal education. He just got to learn through osmosis. So when he really wasn't a very practicing Muslim. So when he married my mom, it wasn't a big deal because there was a lot of Christians marrying Muslims in Palestine. And when he came to America, a long story, but we ended up growing up Catholic. There was more, he wanted us to have some type of faith tradition, so that seemed logical at the time. And it wasn't until we were older and he started to learn about his own faith that he realized that there was a lot of differences between the teachings. So he wanted us to wait until we were older to get confirmed, which made sense to me at 13. And he tried to teach us about some things about Islam, but at 13, we knew everything there was to know about everything. So we didn't listen. Like, it took you till you were 27. I was 13. I knew everything.
I had it at 13 also. Yes.
So we didn't really listen much. And so I grew up, I would have called myself agnostic if I knew what that was, where I had a firm belief in God, but I had a big mistrust of organized religion. So I didn't really practice any faith until, and actually when my husband and I got married, we didn't even talk about it. He's Palestinian and he's Muslim, but also kind of non-practicing. So we didn't really talk about faith until we started our family, and I wanted to teach my kids something about God because I had a firm belief in God. And I started to search, and I found my dad had given me years ago stuff about Islam, and started answering questions that I had growing up, and it answered the questions that I was constantly asking. And it spoke to me in my heart, in my head. It made sense to me. It was logical.
And is there in the Christian faith, there's baptism, there's some, rite of passage or initiation kind of thing,
Mm-hmm.
I may not even know what I'm talking about.
Nose piercing.
Because, I need to be really honest that I don't practice a particular religion.
Why is she allowed to be here?
But I'm reminded of a time that my daughter was like in 4th grade, and we talk about all religions in my home, and I got a phone call from one of my friends who said, your daughter is shouting very loudly at recess that she's an atheist, don't you? And I was like, I guess, she had learned that was the word of the day. But now I can't remember what I was going to say.
Rituals.
Oh, yeah. Is there a ritual to?
Islam doesn't have a whole lot of rituals to it. Very different from the Catholic Church, just plenty of ritual, which is very lovely. But Islam doesn't have a lot of ritual. In order to become a Muslim, you profess that there is only one God, and you say that you believe that Muhammad was his messenger, which says two things. One, that there was only one God, one creator of the universe, and that Prophet Muhammad was a prophet, and we don't pray to him. We pray only to God. And we believe in the message, his final message. So in saying that, you're Muslim.
Now, did you have friends? How old were you when you converted?
26, 27.
What did your peer group think? Was there they just knew you as Rose, and it was like, that's just Rose?
I guess it was, I started learning and practicing more and more, so it wasn't like a coming out.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have a coming out party. I don't think people really noticed. I just started having more and more Muslim friends, mm-hmm. and I started hanging around with more and more Muslims, and God was really great in that respect, because I have such great Muslim friends that I've had for years. We're still like really tight and connected, and we were able to raise our children. We had children about the same age, so our children were raised Muslim. So it was a blessing from God that I found a lot of Muslim friends. But I still have non-Muslim friends. So it wasn't like I think it was just kind of gradual as I started learning more and more. And I remember telling one of my good friends, like, the stuff that I would discover. I'd say, Amy, did you know, blah, 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 blah. And she's like, okay, great, that's good for you, kind of thing. So it wasn't like an all of a sudden thing. It was a gradual understanding and learning about the faith.
What do you like? If I was on my trip and I had the opportunity to speak with you, the question was, what do you think is going on with all this hyper-polarized us and them in the U.S.? What do you think that's about?
I do think it's about people in power wanting to stay in power, and the fear. And fear is what drives a lot of this. They're afraid of losing their power. People are afraid of change. They're afraid of the other, whoever the other is. And it's dangerous when people who have the mic, the people who have the ear of the people, egg that concept on. And actually, that was the reason why I went to that first Trump rally. It wasn't really even to protest Trump himself, because he was not the only one who are using their platform, whatever it is, to vilify others and to make the other people the bad people. And what I experienced one-on-one was that they were decent people. So that, I think that if we have a chance to talk to someone, and it's tough to find someone who's different than you. So that's what propelled me to go to Cleveland during the Republican convention, was to find those people and to look for folks who were different and to be very intentional, because I've been involved with Mecklenburg Ministries and on the board of the Community Building Initiative. And we do a lot of programs, but the choir keeps showing up. It's hard to reach outside the choir. And I think that's what the purpose of my going out, like, people have asked me, it's like, why do you want to be around those people? And it's because I don't think of them as those people. We're all in this together, and the concept that they are, like, the guy, the Trump guy who with the Down syndrome daughter, it's like we automatically see this one thing that makes you think all of these things about that person, and they aren't. I mean, we are so much more alike than we are different. We have different experiences, and we have to acknowledge that. But we have a lot more in common than we do differently. What was your question?
I think this is what happens. It reminds me, I often reach out to people who are very different because I don't get them. Like, I don't get it. So I love to reach out to people who I don't get and say, please help me understand this, explain this to me. It was interesting, so the Red Boots has led to this group of people that are meeting now and trying to learn how to engage in the way that you engage and I've engaged and you engage. And we were having a meeting at another Broken Egg that's a consistent meeting, and there was a fellow there named Ken who'd been coming for quite some time. Everything he was sharing in the meetings was, I would go, that's me. Oh, yeah, in my mind. I'm like, I agree, I get it. I'm like you. And so one morning we walked out to his car, and his car was covered, it had NRA stickers. It had this thing about guns on it. And I have to tell you that, prior to my experience with him, I had a vision of what that person looked like. And it was not the guy that had just talked about how he wanted to love people. So Ken actually teaches people how to shoot firearms. And he and I go to coffee frequently whenever there's something hot in the news about firearms. I'm like, please talk to me about this because I want to get your perspective. He's not for no restrictions, but he is moderate in that view. So anyway, I know this sounds, I'm going to go learn how to fire a gun, and Ken is going to teach me.
Can I come?
Yeah, do you want to come? I mean, it's
Can
sort
a bunch of my friends come?
it's this feeling of there's nothing from, I don't feel like I have anything to fear. I'm just curious. Like, I don't know anything about guns. I don't fire. I don't own one. I don't think I'll ever own one. They scare the bejeezy out of me, right? I want to just learn to fire one. Doesn't mean that I have to be in support of anything. So
this reminds me of a question I want to
Yeah.
ask you too.
yeah.
So I've said this before in a totally different context. In my life as a preacher, and I'm old now, so I started way back, there's been this dramatic shift in the way people respond to what I do for a living. So when I started in the ministry, if somebody wanted to pay me a compliment going out of the back of church, you know what they would say? They would say, "Pastor, you stepped on my toes today." And that was a good thing, right? They came to church expecting to be challenged, expecting to have the life they'd been living dissolved and rebuilt, right? That was the norm. That's what everyone was looking for. Nowadays, if somebody wants to pay me a compliment on a sermon, you know what they say? They say, "Pastor, I agree with you." And that's a fundamental shift in the universe. I don't think it's a good one, not just for me as a preacher, but just sort of in general. And I wonder how this happened, because I know people who, when they choose their newspaper, when they choose which news outlet to watch, when they choose who to hang around with, when they whatever, they choose who's going to buttress what they already think, right? So my mother is someone, she watches Fox News, and it feeds what she thinks. And you know what I'm saying? And she doesn't want to hear kind of, oh, there's this other viewpoint. And people do this all the time, and I think I used to be that way. And then at some point, I don't know why, I had like a conversion. Maybe this is the conversion that America needs, is what I'm about to describe. And I want to ask you all why this is hard and if there's any hope. There's some conversion where I discovered I was bored with the things that I already thought. And I thought, I want to kind of learn something different. I want to see why somebody would think differently. I want to have my thoughts challenged and see if they're as wise as I think they are, and I want to understand the rest of the world. So I've kind of made it my business to kind of like read the other guys or whatever. And it's absolutely wonderful and illuminating, and it makes you a better human being and everything. And I wonder why we don't do this very much. I was talking to this is so interesting. Just the other day, I was talking to a guy, I referred to something that I'd read in the New York Times, and he said, "liberal paper," right? But let me just say that in Sunday's New York Times, there was an article about Trump supporters in the Rust Belt. I cannot imagine a more sympathetic, positive portrayal of people and why someone would support Donald Trump than was in the New York Times. It's kind of interesting. So at any rate, why do you think that is that there's this kind of, I want to stick with what I know, and I want more stuff to back up what I know and give me more ammunition for what I already know? I did the gun illusion there, didn't I? What is that, and is there any hope for change? You guys give us hope, seeing what you do. But again, not just for the choir, kind of for like the world.
Well, I'll speak for myself, which is something I have learned is all I have control over. And I think part of what I have hopefully instilled in my own children is curiosity, which is not something that I think is currently embedded in dialogue. So there's the question, for example, if I was talking to Rose and she said something, there's two ways to ask why. There's the why, which is obviously going to shut down the conversation, and then there's the why, which is very different. And I think something about embedding curiosity in our children and then carrying that onward, and there's nothing to when I ask with curiosity, there's nothing to fear. It's like I really want to know, why are you supporting Trump? Wow. Or why are you supporting Hillary? I didn't answer your question.
That's right.
Yeah. What do you think?
I mean,
there's a fear there, I guess, that somehow by being found out that, I want to feel safe. And so if I agree with you, then suddenly I feel very safe. But I have found that I feel less safe when everybody thinks like me, because there's something weird about that. Like, I I feel safe with curiosity and being able to formulate my own thoughts rather than sort of following along the thoughts of someone else.
Well, or we think curiosity is for 4-year-olds and 11-year-olds. They should be curious. But by the time you're an adult, you're supposed to be omnicompetent. You can file a resume, here are my competencies, and I'm on top. You would never reveal, here are the things that I don't know. And in Christian theology, this has actually been a big strain in Christian theology's history that people forget about, is that the wisest theologians have talked a lot about what we don't know about God, right? That there's this mystery. We don't have it all figured. We know a lot of things about God, but what we don't know dwarfs what we know about God, and hence the quest for life is to be curious and try to learn more about God. Okay, so adult curiosity.
I think the way that we get our news is very much changed because I think that nowadays, especially younger generation or younger folks than me, they get their news online.
Mine get it from Stephen Colbert.
Yeah, well, there's that too. Well, that's okay. But that is true. But so you get your news from sources, and for example, if it's on Facebook, or if you're, whoever is your, the news page on your computer or whatever pops up, if you click on stuff, say that you're interested in spaceship landings from other planets, and you click on that, then that feeds more of that same thing. So in your perspective, you literally think that there's lots of these sightings and that this is happening everywhere, and you think that everybody else thinks the same thing. So the way that we get our news is what we don't realize, that there's something different because we think this is the reality. So you have to be intentional. You have to take the time, and it takes time. Because right now, people's attention span is so short because you got to get to those videos of the cute kittens before you do anything else. So your attention span is so short that it takes an investment in time to try to figure out something else. So I was intentional because I'm trying to not fall into that pattern. So I purposely follow people who have a very different viewpoint, and I try to have conversations with people who are very different. And I tried to find news sources. I actually researched news sources, there's a survey of who, right and left, what the news sources are. And pretty much across the board, people think that the Wall Street Journal is seen as very conservative. So I subscribe to the Wall Street Journal online, and I follow their stories, and Christian Science Monitor, which is actually kind of liberal anyways, but I'm trying to find out what other people think, and it is time consuming. And I think that we've got so much time, but people fill it very quickly with things that kind of comfort and just reinforce what you already know. But I think that's a part of why we don't realize that there's other perspectives, because we only know our own perspectives.
I was going to say one quick thing.
Yeah,
one thing
please.
that I've become aware of over the last couple of years, and I call it that kind of nummy, yummy feeling when you know that you're absolutely right, And so I'll read something, and it's like, I'm right, and that felt really good. And so that's when I get worried about myself, is when I have this sort of just completely satisfaction, like, I am right. It's not okay. Some things, that's the other sort of awkwardness of this. There are some things that I believe are just from a humanitarian basis right. And that's the things that push my buttons. And so when I'm in a conversation that's around one of those issues, I have to decide in the moment, is building the bridge at this moment more important than my being right? And that's always the question I have to ask myself.
Not be me as a 27-year-old. Let me ask one more question, and then let these good people who've been kind go home. The question that I have is, at least a lot of us in this room are Myers-Park Methodist Christian people, and we're trying to do what you're trying to do with that hijab, right? Is we're trying to figure out how to be pleasing to God. In terms of how we live during this political season, how we think about race, how we think about homosexuality, how we think about Jews, Muslims, and all kinds of beliefs and such in the city of Charlotte that it wasn't around years ago, right? So we're trying to navigate that and be good and faithful and better. What would you recommend to us?
I have a story. Can I tell a story?
Absolutely.
So this was one of my final seasons with Girls on the Run, and I was running a lap with every girl on her last day of Girls on the Run. And at the moment, I was with a little girl named Madeline, who was in 4th grade. And this child looked a lot like Junie B. Jones. Her hair was a mess, and she had shorts that were like up to here, and tube socks and high-top sneakers. And we were walking a lap together. And I said to this, in silence, we were just walking. And then somewhere I got this idea. I said, so Madeline, how is it that you and I ended up together? There's millions of people in the world. What is that about? And this little girl, without any pause whatsoever, goes, she's 9, by the way. Well, you see, Molly, it's like this. And then she said, you see, Molly, it's like this. God has an idea, but he has a problem. He needs to get the idea down to earth. So what he does is he wraps a body around the idea, and then he sends it here to be born. Now, since the idea inside of all of us is really big and really bold, it might take lots of people to come together to get the really big idea out. And that is, of course, Molly, how you get your gifts and your talents. It's God's tools to help you get the idea from inside of your body out before your body dies.
I was like, drop the mic.
Yes. And
Mouths of babes.
I remember the exact moment that she finished her sentence, and I started to I was like, God has spoken, right? And she looked at me and she said, are you crying? And I said, yes, I am. And so that child put into language how I try to live my life, and that is to recognize that every living human being has an idea, and it is my job to do my very best to focus on that. And for me, that requires an intentional, conscious effort to decide to love first. It's something I do every day. It's a decision. It's not something that just happens. I have to decide I'm going to love that first, and then all the other stuff can happen. That's all I wanted to say.
So let me add to this. So in Christian theology, we say every person is made in the image of God. It's something I've tried to talk about during this political season in my blogging and so on, is the question, what is God like? And then how can we be like that? So when I see people that, with regard to politics, they're angry or they're afraid or whatever they are, I just God's not angry, right? God's not afraid. On Palm Sunday, I preached a sermon. I misspoke, and it made some people, they thought I was criticizing Donald Trump. I was just talking about politics in America. I misspoke. It's easy to do in the pulpit. Preaching's harder than it looks, way harder. But what I was saying is that when Jesus came in on that donkey to Jerusalem, he came in, he was humble, he was not arrogant, right? He was not angry, he was full of love. But yet we've fallen over politicians who are not humble, but they're arrogant, and they're very angry, and there doesn't seem to be much love in the equation. And then we become the same way. So to the degree to which that is the case, we're not being that idea of God, that image of God that's in us. And so the question is, how can I be holy as a person? How can I be like Jesus when I think about the troubles of the world? Anyway, that's a lovely thing. Rose.
I think that the whole concept of listening is a lost art, because we tend to just, we're just waiting to interrupt. until the person stops so I could tell you what I think. There's actually a group in Cleveland, and I'm drawing a blank of what the name of the group is, but they go around the world with a sign, and they purposely write it on cardboard, and it says free listening. And they just hold this paper up, this cardboard up, and people flock to them and they just listen. And that's something that we could do more of. After what you said, I can't beat a 9-year-old.
But you know, what's interesting to me, I don't think there's a greater way to actionize, I just made that word up.
That's a great word.
Actionize love than to listen with my whole being. Because in the moment that I'm listening, if I'm really doing it, I don't know any other greater way to love someone. That goes for my children. It's just a way of saying, I am here, I'm holding this space, I am present with you, and we are together. That is love to me. And I think about those politicians. I had the opportunity to be, I don't know why I'm so emotional, in Washington for a couple years. And I got to spend a lot of time with those people. And they are as frightened as anyone.
The least free people in America.
Yes, and how can I set aside my own harsh judgment, because it's like you're hurting us. Can't you see you're tearing us apart? And try to be available to listen, if given the opportunity, to those people as well. Because clearly there's something hurting there or something happening there that requires that activity.
There's listening and there's listening. So there's listening that I'm hearing every word you're saying, but I'm thinking, what's wrong with it? Or I used to joke with my children. I'd be talking to them sometimes, and I would just stop and I'd say, you're just waiting for me to stop talking. They'd say, that's correct. So they were listening, but you're talking about another kind of listening that is empathetic, that is open, that grants that you have some wisdom, you have a heart, you have a life, you have hurts, you have joys. Yeah.
I think another factor to this whole thing is because we've talked a lot about the fear that people have, and fear is what drives so much of this animosity. And fear is an act of cowardice. Fear means you don't have strength in trust that God is taking care of it. So the concept of loving takes courage. You need to be courageous enough to believe that God is with you and trust what He is trying to get out of your body, I guess. So that whole concept of showing love, it takes a leap of faith to lead with love, because we tend to be more afraid.
That's beautifully said. Yeah, courage in our day, it kind of is like, we tend to associate it with like tough and mean, but you're talking about courage as leading with love. I heard Mother Teresa one time say this thing, and she parsed it right. The word courage comes from a word that means largeness of heart, right? So the courageous person is the one that has the large heart, not the narrowed heart. This has been a wonderful evening. Join me in thanking Hey, thank you for watching, and we hope you got something out of that. If you have any feedback for us, any response that was helpful to you, we would love to hear that. Please let us know. And everything that we put out is free, and we want it to be that way, but if you're able and feel led to support the mission of our church or the cost of providing this online content, here's how to do so.